If Jim Lawler was being honest with himself, he had to admit that he was terrible at recruiting spies. So bad, in fact, that he spent most nights worrying about getting fired from the only job he had ever loved, a job he had landed just 2 years earlier as a case officer for the Central Intelligence Agency. It was 1982, and Lawler was 30 years old. He had joined the CIA after attending law school at the University of Texas, where he had gotten mediocre grades, and then cycling through a series of dull jobs. One day, unsure what to do with his life, he telephoned a CIA headhunter he had once met on campus. A job interview followed, and then a polygraph test, then a dozen more interviews in various cities, and then a series of exams that mostly seemed designed to ferret out everything Lawler didn't know. Who, he wondered to himself after one, memorizes rugby world champions from the 1960s? Eventually, he made it to the final interview. Things weren't looking good. His exam performances had been poor to middling. He had no overseas experience, no knowledge of foreign languages, no military service or special skills. Yet, the interviewer noted, Lawler had flown himself to Washington, D.C. for this interview on his own dime. He had persisted through each test, even when it was clear he didn't have the first clue how to answer most questions. He had responded to every setback with what seemed like admirable, if misplaced, optimism. Why, the man asked, did he want to join the CIA so badly? I've wanted to do something important my entire life, Lawler replied. He wanted to serve his country and bring democracy to nations yearning for freedom. Even as the words came out, he realized how ridiculous they sounded. Who says yearning in an interview? So he stopped and he took a breath, and he said the most honest thing he could think of. My life feels empty, he told the interviewer. I want to be part of something meaningful. A week later, the agency called to offer him a job. He accepted immediately, and he reported to Camp Peary, the farm as the agency's training facility in Virginia is known, to be tutored in lockpicking, dead drops, and covert surveillance. The most surprising aspect of the farm's curriculum, however, was the agency's devotion to the art of conversation. In his time there, Lawler learned that working for the CIA was essentially a communications job. A field officer's mandate wasn't slinking in shadows or whispering in parking lots. It was talking to people at parties, making friends in embassies, bonding with foreign officials in the hope that someday you might have a quiet chat about some critical piece of intelligence. Communication is so important that a summary of CIA training methods puts it right up front. Quote, find ways to connect, it says. A case officer's goal should be to have a prospective agent come to believe, hopefully with good reason, that the case officer is one of the few people, perhaps the only person, who truly understands him. Lawler finished spy school with high marks and was shipped off to Europe. His assignment was to establish rapport with foreign bureaucrats, to cultivate friendships with embassy attachés, and to develop other sources who might be willing to have candid conversations, and thereby, his bosses hoped, open channels for discussions that make the world's affairs a bit more manageable. Lawler's first few months abroad were miserable. He tried his best to blend in. He attended black tie soirees and had drinks at bars near embassies. Nothing worked. There was a clerk from the Chinese delegation that he met après-ski and repeatedly invited to lunch and cocktails. Eventually, Lawler worked up the courage to inquire if his new friend perhaps wanted to earn some extra cash, passing along gossip he heard inside his embassy. The man replied that his family was quite wealthy, thank you, and his bosses tended to execute people for things like that. He would pass. Then there was a receptionist from the Soviet consulate who seemed promising until one of Lawler's superiors took him aside and explained that she, in fact, worked for the KGB, and she was trying to recruit him. Eventually, a career-saving opportunity appeared. A CIA colleague mentioned that a young woman from the Middle East who worked in her country's foreign ministry was visiting. Yasmin was on vacation, the colleague explained, staying with a brother who had moved to Europe. A few days later, Lawler managed to, quote, bump into her at a restaurant. He introduced himself as an oil speculator. As they began talking, Yasmin mentioned that her brother was always busy, never available for sightseeing. She seemed lonely.